Keith Berelowitz is the founder of PRX Engage, a platform tackling clinical research's most expensive problem, patient recruitment and retention failures. With 2 decades in clinical operations, including leadership at Richmond Pharmacology, one of the world's highest enrolling research sites, he's contributed to 12 plus market-approved therapies and driven over £125 million in revenue. As chair of the Fulham Research Ethics Committee, he combines operational efficiency with ethical oversight. His platform identifies participants more likely to complete studies using mobile-first tools and outcome-based pricing. In this podcast episode, he shares why most recruitment solutions fail, how to predict patient retention from first contact, and practical strategies to reduce costly trial delays. And welcome to another episode of Freelancer Training on how to find more direct clients, a podcast hosted by myself, Jason Willis-Lee. This is the show that makes digital marketing easier and more fun using the perfect combo and just the right dose of business strategy and tech. I'm your host, Jason Willis-Lee, a medical translator, digital marketing specialist. Today I'm very thrilled to talk to Keith Berelowitz. Keith brings a very unique perspective to our discussion. Keith, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on. Happy to
Can
be
you
here.
first, you're welcome. No, my pleasure. First of all, as an icebreaker, could you just tell our audience how you got into patient-sided research? This is a fascinating niche that I'm pivoting towards. I'm learning more about it. I'm trying to get jobs in the linguistic validation space. How did you get into this niche? Can you tell us a bit about your personal business journey?
Sure. I mean, I've been around people with medical conditions my entire life. In fact, we all are in different ways. But I think I had a very focused beginning. So, grandfather was a doctor. Three of my uncles were doctors. So we've always been around um, people with conditions, those who look after them. And then my personal career, I started as a bench scientist. Thought I was going to be an academic for the rest of my life. Realized my ego wasn't even that big, and so made my way over to commercial clinical research. And it was there, that was the first time I started to really engage with people about taking part in clinical trials. And this really started in the healthy participant space. And I do call healthy patients participants because they are engaging in a more transactional manner. And then over the years, the industry has changed. We are far more focused on people with medical conditions. And through lived experience in terms of having unfortunately lost people along the way, and then through the sponsors that I've worked with, it's really become a focus on patients first and patient-focused research. Did I give you a good enough idea of the background, or would you like some more?
Absolutely. I mean, why are pharma companies, Keith, pouring so much money into patient research? Why is it so important? I just told you before we hit record, I used to do a lot of work in the doctor-patient communication space for a
Hmm.
bunch of psychiatrists down in La Laguna, which is in Tenerife. It's in South Tenerife. And it was all about how paternalistic the doctor-patient model was and is, perhaps to a certain degree. How has that now changed? Why are we talking about patient-sided research so much, and why are pharma companies pouring a lot of resources into this area?
It's a combination of things. For many years, I saw patient or sided research in a slightly different form. It would be actually clinician-focused research. So you would see your clinician would look at your medical background, any acute or chronic condition going on. If they happen to be involved in a clinical trial, they say, "Oh, this trial's going on. Why don't you have a look at this?" So you as a patient were being directed towards research. And this was for decades. This is pretty much how I saw patients coming into clinical trials. I think COVID changed that quite dramatically. Here, for the first time, there was a call to action from the general public to become involved in research because it all worked to a greater good. And so, therefore, a lot more people were exposed to clinical trials in the pursuit of a therapy for a very acute and obviously serious situation. And I think since then, we've seen quite a dynamic shift. Sponsors are looking at moving into patient studies much earlier in the process. Typically, a phase 1 study in the classical sense would start with healthy participants. And then once we had established safety and maybe dose, we would then move into patient groups. But with the change in therapies, the advance of gene therapies, gene editing drugs, and so on, you can't really put these into healthy participants. And so we've seen quite a dynamic shift from a need, both financial and scientific, to move towards patients. And I think we've reached a point where pharma also realize that good science is not enough. If people aren't enrolling in studies, the trial will fail. And sadly, we're still in a position where the numbers touted regularly, somewhere between 60 and 80% of trials have some form of delay that's as a result of poor engagement and enrollment in the study. So there really has to be a focus. What influences a person to become involved in a study? Will they understand it? Why join it? Why stay in it? And those studies really need to reflect real world needs. And by that, I mean, does it fit with a patient's lifestyle?
Keith, what are the sort of opportunities available for specialized freelancers? So I'm talking about specialized medical translators like myself and those listening, there will be a sector of in medicine. Could you
Mhm.
talk a little towards the linguistic validation? And these are multilingual clinical trials. I've seen trials going into 15, 20 languages. Could you talk a little bit about that and perhaps the three top areas where clinical trials are being conducted? I'm guessing oncology is one of them. I've seen a lot of cardiology trials. Could you talk a little about the opportunities available to us?
Sure. So in any given year, there's roughly 16,000 new sponsor-led interventional trials. And we've seen a real shift now in terms of where these studies are run. It's not just typically in the US or North America, the UK and Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and so on. And that's because we've seen a real uptick in the number of studies for rare disease. And rare disease is really where I focus and our company focuses. And I think that's created the opportunity because, to your point, these studies are now running in 15, 20 countries, multiple languages. I mean, I've seen some studies where there's 80 plus sites. So I think there's huge opportunity for people like yourself. The advent of AI is both a hindrance and a help. It just depends on how you look at it. If you see it as the enemy, then it will be a hindrance. But if those tools can be used to facilitate some of the process of that medical translation along the journey to the human-sided translation, because, to the point you and I discussed, in some countries, the way in which information is communicated has a very different meaning to how it's communicated in another. I've had the fortune of working with a number of Japanese sponsors and working with Japanese patients or healthy volunteers in studies I've done in the past. And just some of those words are completely lost in translation. But beyond that, it's the way in which you speak to a person, depending on that person's status within or age or whatever it happens to be in their society. So I think for yourselves, there's huge opportunity. I would use AI to help speed up some of the process. That's been one of the frustrations, I would say, from work in the past. It takes a long time, but then use those tools and finesse the language to make sure that it is adapted to that locality that you're going to present it. And there's tons of opportunities, whether it be research content or reaching out via digital campaigns, educating people about trials, or just looking at the behavioral nuances. That's something that AI cannot do. That's the human element. And that's something that we do in our business. We use AI where it is very helpful, but that final step of the journey is human, always.
Could you just talk a little bit about the behavioral science, Keith? I mean, we talked about coming on. I've always seen behavioral science as something to help sales. So in terms of creating scarcity, creating urgency, price anchoring, and saying something is more expensive, it makes the cheaper option seem more reasonable.
Mhm.
How is behavioral science, can you tell us, applied to clinical trials and specifically patient-sided research and patient engagement?
Well, I think it's growing, but it's not being applied particularly well, I think, in some instances. Sadly, I've seen some instances where you talk about that scarcity, which doesn't work with patients. So I saw a line in it was a microsite for a study where it said, spaces in this trial are limited, enroll now. As a patient, I would look at that and say, forget it. I'm not buying a car or the new iPhone or whatever it happens to be. This is my
Yeah.
health. I will take the time I need. And so actually, there needs to be a bit of a flip, and this is where we come at it from. So for me, there's a few key areas. One is self-determination theory. So that's where we really look at awareness, competence, and relatability. If you can show that the study is relatable to a person's life and they understand what it is that's being asked of them. Simple question, why? Then you're likely to better engage people. The other area that we focus on very heavily is cognitive load theory. Um, you give someone a ton of information, a 40-page patient information sheet, they're taking in less than 10%. You breadcrumb in that information, not because people can't handle it, but because people absorb information. We all do. Better if this is done in bite-sized pieces. Think about how you've revised for exams when you were growing up, and make those flashcards, whatever it happens to be. So you take in information better and you're more likely to retain it and understand it if you're trying to do this in smaller components. That's the other thing. But it goes beyond that. It's actually looking at how you take someone through that clinical trial engagement and enrollment journey. And then the other component is really looking at trust models. That's the other thing that we focus on at PRX Engage. If you are not trustworthy, because you've come at this from a particularly different angle, or if you are not relatable to something that patient is comfortable and familiar with, then you are blown out of the water. So I think that's where the industry is going and starting to change. I see a number of behavioral scientists now being employed within biotech and pharma companies, which is fantastic. Because ultimately our job is to engage, to educate, and empower. And if you give patients agency, then you're more likely to have someone come along that full journey with you. And so for us, we look at this as medical suitability is very important. That's the gatekeeper. If you're not medically suitable, there's no point in looking at the rest of it, but it's not everything. Rather, you need to look as well at, we look at decisional conflict as to whether or not, or how much conflict someone has about taking part in research and how we address that. And then we look at how patients are likely to stay in the study. It's all good and well engaging someone and enrolling them. The hard bit is actually keeping someone engaged all the way through. And part of that will come down to the person themselves and what they're like in their day-to-day life. So there's a lot still to do. We're working on another proprietary assessment tool that will focus on mental fitness. So there's still plenty of work to do, but it's encouraging that we are now moving into that space where actually we think beyond medical suitability.
What are a couple of quick wins, sort of quick actions that we can take as medical translators, Keith, to get into this space? And have you seen any mistakes that people, common mistakes that freelancers make when approaching this market? Because it is very niche. I think patient-centered research is a niche area within medical translation. Linguistic validation, obviously, we're talking about. I'm learning much more about this as we speak, trying to pivot my services business. What are a couple of things listeners can quickly action, sort of quick wins, to position themselves better for this niche?
Embrace technology and where it's going, rather than railing against it. That's the first thing, because we are on a technology train, and in some cases, technology will come and go. But look at where technology, where AI can work alongside you. Um, be very transparent in your approach, um, and no pointing fingers or pointing out where things are worse. We're all acutely aware that of what's working and what's not. Um, and I think it's about structuring your pitch in such a way that this is where I add value, and this is the impact I'll have on your ROI. For me, that make it very simple. Um, I've been speaking a lot, but talking too much about skill set and so on is not enough. You need to say, this is where we see the challenge, and this is how we'd solve it. Um, so those are the few things, and then engaging with the communities. Really understand the community that pharma is looking to outreach to, and if you can show your understanding of that, it puts you in a good position.
Could you give one concrete example of where AI has helped instead of hindered patient-sided research? We mentioned there's obviously a flip side and two sides of the coin. Is it just about content creation, or is there a specific example you can think of within this niche where AI has certainly sped things along rather than hindered?
I think that AI's got a number of use cases. We're still not using it fully. Where I think it's worked extremely well is, I mean, our area, something that we do. We've built a platform that typically would have taken many program engineers and would have probably taken several more months, maybe a year longer. So it's definitely sped up the development of the platform and our ability to iterate and work in a more efficient way. We're using AI to aggregate medical conditions so that we can make searching far easier for patients. Um, it's allowed us to move away from simplified keyword search, which is pretty much what everyone else does, into semantic search and do that at pace. And the key use case for me of AI, it's made patients' engagement in trying to identify clinical trials and present information in a plain language manner much quicker and far more feasible. However, that as long as that technology was designed with patients and with people who understand the industry. I've seen many examples of platforms in the space that I work in, which is trial engagement and matching and connection to sites that have been built as pure tech plays, if you want to call it that. And these platforms have been solved in a way that they look to solve the problem in a tech manner. Very logical. People are not logical. We all have nuances. And so it's just having that right balance of AI is very useful because it sped up the process, but you still need that human element.
Keith, I'm cognizant of your time, so just a couple of quick fire
Sure.
questions to bring the interview to a close. Number one, what's the biggest misconception pharma companies do you think have about patient recruitment? What's the biggest sort of something they just don't get?
I think there's still a misconception that we can turn up to a community and say, "Hi guys, we've got an ongoing trial, and patients will come and walk through the door." That transactional approach is, for me, a thing of the past, and we really need to look at long-term relationship building.
The worst patient retention mistake you've witnessed in your career as head of PXR Engage?
The worst mistake is us humans, where we put ourselves in that position. Oh, well, I would do this trial, but ultimately, patients are not data points. And if a patient is not heard, then we've lost them. And I think that's the biggest retention mistake, is we haven't thought about what happens beyond enrollment. And that's how the study's designed. And would I do this? And the question I always ask is, would I allow a family member into the study? And could I see them seeing the study through to the end?
And finally, Keith, just one more. If you could fix one thing about how clinical research sites communicate with patients, what would that be? What would be the one fix you would put on the table?
Mm-hmm. Be human. Don't talk like a lawyer. Don't talk like a regulator. Talk to a patient and listen. Really listen, and that will certainly hold you in good stead for the variability that you are definitely going to see within a study and within patients.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. One final takeaway or sort of notable nugget. We've covered quite a lot, so I'm guessing there are listeners interested in moving into this niche, patient-sided research, linguistic validation. Can you give them just one sort of takeaway that encompasses everything we've talked about on the interview?
Sure. So I think if you're looking to step into the space, the one thing I look at in clinical research is not about patients joining trials. It's about people looking to improve their lives, improve their health. And if you keep that front and center, then you'll win people's trust, and it'll stand you in good stead for what should be a long and engaging career.
Keith, where can my listeners connect with you or learn more about your work? Where is the best platform, or is there a downloadable? Is there something available that we can point them to?
Sure. I mean, they can go have a look at our website, which is prxengage.com, or go directly to the app, but you can search through the application through the website, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm that irritating person that can't keep my mouth shut, and I'm there every day. So go to the company page or connect with me directly. Always happy to have a conversation with someone new.
No, on the contrary, I'm happy to see that you post regularly. Thank you so much. Let's wrap it up for today's episode of Freelancer Training on how to find more direct clients. Stay tuned for more engaging discussions on the ever-evolving landscape of digital marketing and language. Until next time, remember to stay on your game, as I always say, and future-proof your career in the AI era. Bye for now, your host, Jason Willis-Lee, and a big thank you again to my special guest, Keith Berelowitz.
Here's a fun fact about Jason. The son of 2 music teachers, Jason is still a keen amateur pianist. Thanks for tuning in to the How to Find More Direct Clients Than You Can Poke a Stick At podcast. We'll be back soon. In the meantime, why not head over to www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com to access all our tools and resources to monetize and future-proof your freelance translation business. And don't forget to hit the plus button in Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or subscribe in Spotify to be notified when new episodes drop. For regular tips and insights, business strategy, or marketing techniques straight to your inbox, please sign up at www.entrepreneurialtranslator.com.